Imagine you're standing in like this beautiful little bakery in Paris. The smell of fresh bread and melted butter is just thick in the air.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Right. And you just want to order a simple classic croissant. You know the words. You've practiced this specific scenario in your head like 100 times.
You're completely ready.
Exactly. But then it's finally your turn. The baker looks at you, expecting you to speak. And, well, your mind just goes entirely blank. You just freeze. The silence stretches out. The vocabulary you spent hours memorizing just, vanishes into thin air.
It completely evaporates.
Yeah. And you end up just pointing at the glass display and grunting something like, one of those, please.
That is just such a visceral, incredibly isolating feeling. And I mean, it doesn't just happen in bakeries on vacation.
No, definitely not.
It happens in really high-stakes environments, too. Picture sitting in a corporate boardroom or dialing into a Zoom call with your executive team.
Right. We're standing at a podium.
Exactly. The moment you need your second language, the absolute most, the system just completely crashes.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to tackle this highly relatable, universally frustrating phenomenon.
We've all been there.
We really have. We are looking at the dreaded blank mind syndrome when speaking a foreign language, specifically English.
And it's such a crucial topic for anyone on this language journey.
Absolutely. We're pulling from our sources today to extract the actual mechanics of why our brains decide to take, an unapproved vacation at the worst possible moment.
I love that phrase, an unapproved vacation.
It really feels like that. But more importantly, we are going to build a toolkit of actionable, low-pressure strategies to keep the words flowing.
Which is so important, because before we can begin to stop the mind from going blank, we really need to look under the hood at why the brain shuts down in the first place.
Right. We have to understand the root cause.
Yes. This requires looking past the surface-level frustration and understanding the underlying cognitive mechanics. It really comes down to a potent combination of nervous tension and what psychologists refer to as cognitive overload.
Okay, let's unpack that cognitive overload piece first. Because when you're speaking a language that is not your native tongue, the sheer amount of multitasking required is staggering.
It's a massive mental effort.
It really is. In the span of a single second, you're attempting to retrieve the correct vocabulary, apply these complex grammar rules, conjugate verbs, and manage the physical pronunciation of unfamiliar sounds.
All while trying to read the other person's facial expressions.
Exactly. You're monitoring their body language, checking if they understand you. It's just a lot.
It is. And the sources use a really highly visual analogy for this. Think of your brain like a computer system.
Okay, I like that.
When you are speaking a foreign language, you are trying to run too many heavy, demanding applications simultaneously.
So you've got, like, the grammar application open.
Right. You open the grammar app, the vocabulary retrieval app, the tonal inflection app, and eventually the system simply cannot allocate enough RAM.
And it just freezes.
Exactly. The screen just locks up.
I mean, I love that analogy, but I want to push back on it just a little bit.
Sure. Go ahead.
Is it really just a lack of raw processing power? Because a computer freezes because of hardware limitations? But human beings are capable of massive cognitive feats.
That's very true.
It almost feels like the fear of judgment is the actual virus crashing the system rather than just having too many applications open.
That is a crucial distinction to make. You're absolutely right. It is not merely the processing power. The emotional layer acts as the actual catalyst for the crash.
So the emotions trigger the freeze.
Yes. When you introduce social pressure to the equation, like talking to a boss or speaking with a native speaker whose opinion you deeply value, the brain perceives a threat.
Wait, a threat as in like a physical danger?
From an evolutionary standpoint, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Our brains are hardwired by evolutionary biology to prioritize social belonging.
Right, because we are social creatures.
Exactly. For early humans, making a mistake that led to social rejection was quite literally a matter of life and death.
Right.
You couldn't survive alone in the wilderness.
Wow, so the stakes feel incredibly high to the ancient part of our brain.
They really do. So when your fear of making a linguistic mistake spikes, your amygdala, which is the brain's emotional threat detection center, it essentially sounds the alarm.
So the brain treats mispronouncing a word in a boardroom the same way it treats, I don't know, seeing a predator in the bushes.
It sounds crazy, but in terms of neurochemistry, the reaction is remarkably similar. The amygdala initiates a mild fight or flight response.
That explains the racing heart and sweaty palms.
Precisely, and it actually diverts resources and blood flow away from the prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the logical part, right?
Yes, it's at the highly evolved part of your brain that handles logic, reasoning, and complex language processing. The amygdala overrides that system because it decides that survival is simply more important than grammar.
That is absolutely wild.
It really is. Your brain becomes so terrified of the social consequence of saying the wrong thing that it hits the emergency eject button. It is a complete emotional system overload disguised as a linguistic failure.
That completely reframes the whole experience. You know, you aren't failing at English. Your ancient survival mechanisms are just functioning a little too well.
Exactly. You're just being a very efficient human.
I love that. So if we know the computer crashes because the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex, how do we buy time for it to reboot?
Because just standing there in awkward silence is not going to help.
Right. That panic-inducing silence is only going to make those evolutionary alarm bells ring louder and louder.
The immediate tactical solution is to build a conversational safety net. You need to prepare a repertoire of go-to phrases long before you ever actually need them.
Like rehearsed lifelines.
Exactly. When the crash happens, you do not try to force a complex original sentence out of a brain that is actively shutting down. Instead, you deploy that pre-rehearsed lifeline.
What kind of phrases are we talking about here?
Things like, let me think about that for a moment, or I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this, but
I see the value in having a lifeline, definitely. But let's look at how this plays out in reality.
yeah.
If you are relying on these canned, prepackaged phrases, doesn't that make you sound incredibly robotic?
That is a very common fear.
Or worse, you know, does it signal to the listener that you're just unprepared and stalling for time?
They absolutely can sound robotic if you memorize them stiffly and deliver them like a script, but if you utilize them as a tactical pause, their function changes completely.
A tactical pause. Tell me more about that.
The goal isn't just to fill the silence. The goal is physiological regulation.
So it's about calming the body down.
Yes. Think about a fast-paced business negotiation. If you were asked a complex question, pause, take a slow breath, and say, "That is a fascinating point. Let me gather my thoughts on that for a second."
That actually sounds very professional.
Right. You are gracefully taking control of the conversational pacing.
You're stepping out of that rapid-fire rhythm.
And internally, you are doing something profound. By slowing down the interaction and using a phrase that requires zero cognitive effort to produce, you are sending a signal to your nervous system.
You're telling the amygdala to chill out.
Exactly. You are telling it, we are safe. There is no predator here. This tactical pause lowers your heart rate just enough to transition out of the panic mode.
Which brings the blood flow back to the logic centers.
You got it. It allows blood flow to return to the prefrontal cortex. You don't sound flustered or unprepared. You actually sound measured, deliberate, and deeply thoughtful.
So the phrase is just a smokescreen while your brain reboots in the background. That makes a ton of sense.
It's incredibly effective.
But you know, those go-to phrases are really for emergencies. They're the fire extinguisher. How do we train the brain so the fire doesn't start in the first place?
We need to look at prevention.
Right. How do we reprogram the underlying system?
Reprogramming the system requires drastically lowering the stakes during your practice sessions. If the amygdala reacts to social pressure, you have to practice in an environment where social pressure is completely eliminated.
So practicing completely alone?
Yes, you have to remove the fear of judgment entirely.
Our sources highlight some highly practical ways to achieve this, though I have to admit they sound a bit amusing at first.
They can feel a bit silly, yes.
They suggest practicing speaking English when absolutely no one is around to evaluate you. This involves narrating your mundane daily activities out loud.
Literally just talking to yourself.
Right, just walking around your apartment saying, I am making breakfast right now. I need to take the pan, turn on the stove, and fry some eggs. Or even narrating your actions to a pet.
It is actually a very common technique among polyglots. The cognitive benefits are immense.
I have to confess, I tried something similar once. I was driving alone and decided to practice a presentation by explaining my morning commute to the empty passenger seat.
How did it go?
I felt entirely ridiculous, and I really have to wonder about the person formally narrating the process of making eggs to their golden retriever.
The dog is probably just thrilled you're talking about food.
Exactly, the dog is just staring back, hoping for a snack. Is the goal here to perfect a flawless, Hollywood-level accent for the dog? Or is there a deeper cognitive benefit to physically making sounds in an empty room?
The dog certainly isn't grading your vowel sounds, I can promise you that. The deeper benefit lies in developing physical muscle memory without the heavy cognitive load of inventing original high-stakes ideas.
Muscle memory. So it's almost physical.
Speaking a new language is fundamentally an athletic event for your mouth. Your tongue, your lips, your vocal cords, and your diaphragm all have to coordinate and move in entirely new ways to produce the specific phonetic sounds of English.
It's physical training, not just mental studying.
Precisely. When you are narrating the act of making eggs, or when you use a technique called shadowing, which is where you listen to a native speaker on a show and mimic their exact rhythm and intonation a half-second behind them, you are removing the hardest part of speaking.
Because you don't have to think about the content.
Right. You aren't worried about what to say. The words are provided for you. You are simply training your physical articulators and your brain to work together smoothly.
You're just greasing the wheels.
Yes. You are laying down the neural pathways of fluency in a perfectly safe environment. When you enter a high-pressure situation later, the physical act of producing English feels familiar and automatic, which inherently lowers your baseline anxiety.
Okay, so you've trained your physical rhythm, you have your safety net phrases ready to go. But let's bring this back to the real world.
Let's do it.
You're in the middle of a sentence, the conversation is flowing, and suddenly a specific, crucial noun just vanishes. You know the word, it's right on the tip of your tongue, but you cannot retrieve it.
This is where we must transition from preparation into the art of improvisation. The core philosophy of improvisation in a foreign language is prioritizing the message over the exact vocabulary.
Message over vocabulary. I
Yeah.
really like that mindset.
Yes, if you forget the word refrigerator, you cannot stop the conversation and panic. You must use the simpler vocabulary you already have access to in order to build a bridge.
So you just describe it.
Exactly. You describe the function. You say the large thing in the kitchen that keeps the food cold. If you forget the word microwave, you simply call it the box that makes food hot quickly.
I am absolutely obsessed with the magic hot box workaround. It gets the job done immediately.
It really does, and people know exactly what you mean.
And it leads perfectly into another tip from the sources, using humor to diffuse your own mistakes. Imagine you mix up two words that sound similar.
Oh, that happens all the time.
Right. You are at a dinner party trying to say you want dessert, but you accidentally say you want dessert.
The classic phonetic mix-up. The extra z's makes a big difference.
It really does. So instead of shrinking inward with intense embarrassment and letting the amygdala hijack the situation, you just laugh. You use the clever recovery from the source and say, well, I guess I was craving sand instead of chocolate cake today.
It is such a brilliant pivot. And what is truly fascinating there is the psychological effect that humor has on the entire interaction for both you and the listener.
It completely shifts the energy in the room, doesn't it?
It alters the dynamic fundamentally. As an English learner, it's so easy to trap yourself in the mindset that you are constantly being graded.
Like everyone has a red pen.
Exactly. But your conversational partners are not scoring your vocabulary out of 10. Unless you are taking a standardized test, the person across from you only cares about connecting with you and understanding your underlying point.
They just want to communicate.
When you use humor to openly acknowledge a stumble, you project immense confidence.
Because you're demonstrating that you're comfortable enough in your own skin to be imperfect.
Yes, that vulnerability is magnetic. It shows you do not take yourself too seriously. That instantly puts the listener at ease.
It breaks down the walls.
It really does.
Yeah.
They relax, your own nervous system relaxes, and the communication actually becomes far more authentic because you've shared a genuine human moment rather than a robotic, perfectly rehearsed exchange.
Improvising with magic hot boxes and making jokes about eating sand are fantastic survival skills in the moment.
Right.
But they are essentially Band-Aids, right?
They are, yes.
They save the conversation, but they don't solve the underlying problem of word retrieval. To stop relying on Band-Aids, we have to change how we store the words in the first place.
We need a better organizational system.
Exactly. How do we proactively build our vocabulary without causing that massive cognitive overload we discussed earlier?
You have hit on the exact root of the issue. The way most people try to build vocabulary memorizing long alphabetical lists or staring at flashcards is actively working against the brain's natural architecture.
Because it's too isolated.
Exactly. Rote memorization stores words in isolated cognitive silos. Under stress, those isolated silos are incredibly difficult to access. To build a resilient vocabulary, you have to use contextual organization. You have to group words into specific themes.
So abandoning the A to Z dictionary approach entirely.
Entirely. Think of rote memorization like a messy, disorganized filing cabinet. When the pressure is on, you are frantically pulling open drawers looking for one specific piece of paper.
And you just can't find it.
Right. Thematic learning, on the other hand, builds what neuroscientists call associative networks. Instead of a filing cabinet, you are building a spider web.
Okay, a spider web. How does that work in practice?
So you dedicate 1 week entirely to cooking vocabulary. You learn words like stir, boil, skillet, whisk, and bake all at the same time.
So they're all related to one action.
Yes. And the next week, you shift entirely to travel vocabulary, luggage,
Yeah.
boarding pass, customs, departure gate. By learning these words together, you physically wire them together in your brain.
They become linked.
The neural pathways become thicker and more robust, like a multi-lane highway instead of a dirt road. If you are in a conversation about cooking and you forget the word whisk, your brain is already glowing with activity in that specific associative network.
Because you've already activated the surrounding words.
Exactly, because stir and bowl are activated, whisk is much easier to retrieve. Pulling one thread of the web vibrates the whole structure.
That is a profound shift in how to study. You aren't just learning words, you are building interconnected ecosystems of language.
That makes recall so much faster.
And the sources pair this thematic approach with one final, very proactive technique visualization. They recommend closing your eyes and vividly imagining yourself speaking fluently before a big event.
It's a very powerful tool.
Now, I have to play the skeptic here for a second. Does sitting on your couch imagining a successful conversation actually change your brain chemistry, or is that just positive wishful thinking?
It is a rigorously proven psychological tool. It's utilized by elite athletes, surgeons, and public speakers worldwide. The human brain is remarkably bad at distinguishing between a vividly imagined event and a real physical experience.
Really? It can't tell the difference.
Not when it comes to stress responses. Remember how we established that blank mind syndrome is caused by an anticipatory spike in fear?
Right, the amygdala sensing a social threat before the meeting even starts.
Yes. By vividly picturing a successful, calm conversation in your mind beforehand, imagining the room, hearing yourself speak clearly, feeling confident, you are essentially giving your nervous system a dry run.
You're showing the brain that it's safe.
Exactly. You expose yourself to the event in a safe, controlled way. This drastically reduces the anticipatory anxiety. You prime your brain for success. It creates a full-circle defense system against the blank mind.
You are essentially pre-cooling the computer so it doesn't overheat.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Let's trace the incredible architecture of this defense system we've built today. We started by understanding that freezing up isn't a lack of intelligence. It is a very real evolutionary mechanism where the amygdala cuts power to your language centers to protect you from perceived social danger.
And we learn to counteract that by building a safety net of tactical pauses, using transitional phrases to signal safety to the nervous system and bring the logical brain back online.
Then we explored how to lower the stakes and build sheer physical muscle memory by narrating our daily lives and shadowing native speakers.
We embrace the art of improvisation, choosing the underlying message over the perfect vocabulary word, and utilizing humor to transform a mistake into a moment of authentic confidence.
And finally, we looked at how to deeply wire words into our brains by building thematic associative networks instead of relying on rote memorization, all while using visualization to prime the mind for success.
The most important takeaway for anyone navigating this journey is that language acquisition is truly a marathon of endurance, not a sprint to perfection.
It takes time and patience.
It does. You have to extend a deep, profound grace to yourself. Even native speakers lose their train of thought. Even native speakers forget the word for refrigerator and have to describe a cold box.
I do it all the time in my native language.
We all do. Every stumble, every forgotten word, every awkward silence. It is not a reflection of your worth or your intelligence. It is simply necessary data for your brain's complex learning process.
It is just part of the algorithm improving itself. So the next time you find yourself standing in that metaphorical bakery or sitting in that high-pressure meeting and your mind suddenly goes blank, take a slow breath, smile.
Deploy your lifelines.
Yes, you possess the tools now to calm the system and keep the connection alive.
This leaves us with a final, empowering question to ponder as you continue your English journey. We expend an exhausting amount of energy attempting to appear flawless.
We really do.
But if making a mistake, owning it with a smile, And laughing it off actually builds a stronger, more magnetic human connection with the person across from you. Could your intense fear of imperfection actually be the very thing holding you back from genuine communication?
What an incredibly powerful thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into mastering your mindset and your language skills.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
If you found value in this deep dive, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with friends or colleagues who are also on their journey to learning English.
We are all navigating this complex landscape together. Keep practicing, keep stepping boldly into those challenging conversations, and never be afraid to make a beautiful mistake.
We will see you on the next deep dive. Keep speaking and keep growing.